Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our Light of Kailash lecture series here from Changchun, UK. And today we're very happy to welcome Dr. Lucian Maidanuc, who's joining us from Romania. And I was very struck that he's a practicing lawyer of commercial law who started very young, his legal practice in commercial law in his early 20s. And then he told me in his 40s he became more seriously interested in Tibetan history and Buddhism, and he started his PhD about Padmasambhava and as we will hear today, about the very first biography of Padmasambhava. So thank you all for joining us today. The talk will last about an hour, and then we'll have a chance to ask some questions at the end. So thank you, Lucian, for being here with us today, and welcome everybody.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I suppose I can start to talk about my hero, yes? And I will start with a few words about what is Zanglingma. The biography, Zanglingma, the Copper Temple is the translation of the name. Zanglingma is not only the oldest complete biography of Padmasambhava, but also the magic text that shaped the Tibetan tradition's understanding of his life, role, and authority. Its importance is once literary, doctrinal, and symbolic. In other words, it does not merely recount a life, but provides a framework for interpretation that will influence all subsequent representations of Padmasambhava. When the great Tibetan scholar Jamgon Kongtrul compiled the vast collection Rinchen Terje in the 9th century, he made an extremely significant editorial choice. He decided to open this collection with Zanglingma. This decision is by no means accidental. It has the value of a true declaration of intent. Among the dozens of biographies and terma teachings, the first text must be the oldest biography of Padmasambhava. That is, the text that strongly influenced all subsequent biographies and narratives about the master. In this way, Zanglingma is implicitly presented as the first known biography of Padmasambhava, a model, perhaps even a source of inspiration for later biographies, and the founding text for the terma tradition deeply connected to the figure of Padmasambhava. But what is Zanglingma? The Zanglingma biography is not only about Padmasambhava's life in the modern biographical sense, but functions simultaneously as a biography, or more precisely, a hagiography, a religious history, and a text of doctrinal authority. This overlap of genres is essential to understanding the significance of the work. Zanglingma does not merely aim to inform, but to confirm meaning and legitimacy. The established name Zanglingma comes from the place where the text was discovered, the Copper Temple at Sangyé, the first Buddhist monastery in Tibet. And tradition states that the text was hidden by the Yeshe Chögyal, Padmasambhava's spiritual consort, and discovered several centuries, around 4 centuries later, by Nyangral Nyima Özer, one of the most important tertön masters of Tibet. So Zanglingma does not appear as an ordinary literary composition, but as a teaching purposely transmitted over centuries to be revealed at the right moment. The internal structure of the biography is very important because the 41 chapters of the biography are divided into 3 very different parts, almost as we were dealing with 3 distinct texts. The first part of biography, it's about chapters 1 to 5, focuses only on Padmasambhava, is schematic and deeply symbolic, emphasizes spiritual development and fundamental tantric themes, is the most mythical part of the text, dense in symbolism and less concerned with historical narrative. The second part of the biography includes the chapters 6 to 23, and in this section the action takes place in Tibet. The narrative becomes much more detailed, almost realistic, and Padmasambhava is no longer the sole protagonist. The Tibetan king Trisong Detsen takes on a central role, and some chapters include secondary biographies of other masters, like, for example, Vimalamitra. This part seems to have been expanded later, probably to better integrate the history of imperial Tibet and the royal court into the biographical narrative. And the third part of biography, chapters 24 to 41, is the last part and is completely non-narrative. It consists only in Vajrayana teachings and advices on how Vajrayana practice can be integrated into daily life, depending on different circumstances. This part of the biography functions as a true spiritual testament, even though it is weakly connected narratively to the rest of the biography. It offers a typical Tibetan happy end. The master departs, but leaves behind his teachings. Zanglingma is a namtar, and that is very important because Zanglingma belongs to the genre, to this genre called namtar, meaning spiritual biography. And in this type of text, the emphasis is not on precise historical facts, an exact chronology and so on, but rather on the path to liberation, spiritual exemplarity, and the didactic function of the narrative. Historicity thus becomes secondary. The text does not aim to tell primarily what happened, but rather what must be understood, internalized, and assumed from a spiritual point of view. And in the same time, Zanglingma is a terma teaching, a hidden treasure, and this implies the deliberately hiding of the text is discovery at the moment considered appropriate and a transmission that spans generations. In this context, authorship becomes complex and multiple. The testator is Yeshe Chögyal, the discoverer is the tertön master Nyangral Nyima Özer, and Padmasambhava himself appears as the inspirer and the guarantor of authenticity. The text is not legitimized by modern philological criteria, but the karmic continuity and the master-disciple relationship that transcends time. Now I will start to talk about the first hypostasis of Padmasambhava in Zanglingma, which is the Crazy Hermit, in Tibetan nyönpa. The text about nyönpa is the second chapter of Zanglingma, and it refers to the period when Padmasambhava, as a young man, underwent a difficult process of transformation. Starting from his status as Prince of Oriana, he attained that of a realized yogi. The text is not simply a series of hagiographic episodes, and it might seem at first glance, but a symbolic description of a coherent tantric journey which can be read simultaneously in two registers. And that is very important, by the way, external and internal. The nyönpa hypostasis can be considered that the visible beginning of Padmasambhava's becoming. The Prince of Oriana renounces his status, and lives as a wandering ascetic through funeral grounds, gradually transforming himself into an increasingly powerful tantric yogi. However, this becoming is only apparent. The biography presents Padmasambhava as being enlightened from birth. So it does not describe an actual transformation, but rather the process by which the already existing realization manifests itself externally and becomes visible to the world. About the narrative context regarding this hypostasis. The first important moment in the biography is the dance on the palace roof. Padmasambhava does not live his life as a prince in silence, like Buddha Shakyamuni, but publicly proclaims his break with the world. Renunciation becomes a visible manifesto rather than a discreet retreat. This scene marks the break with royal status, the beginning of unconventional tantric behavior, and the embracing of tantric identity. This is followed by departure into exile, life as a wandering hermit in the funeral grounds, and confrontation with all kinds of evil forces. These episodes describe the gradual detachment from the conventional world and the affirmation of tantric identity. Viewed as a whole, the chapter regarding the Crazy Hermit describes Padmasambhava's transformation into a heruka, and that is very important as well. Heruka in Tibetan Traktung, literally the blood drinker, does not refer to a demonic figure, but to an angry male, ferocious male tantric deity, an intense and ardent manifestation of the energy of compassion. Transformation into heruka refers actually to the tantric practice of yoga of the deities, Ishtadevata or Len Eldior, through which the adept identifies with his or her meditation deity and assumes the divine identity and enlightened qualities. The text marks 8 stages of his becoming. The number 8 has symbolic value in Vajrayana and suggests a complete journey. Throughout these stages, there are distinctive constants, breaking with social norms, embracing of the signs of the heruka, bone ornaments, tiger skin, clothing, kapala, and the other specific props of the tantric yogi. The life of a wandering ascetic hermit through the funeral grounds in Tibetan düdul, confrontation with hostile forces and encountering dakinis and receiving empowerments from them. The transformation in heruka is gradual. From the dance on the palace roof to the end of the chapter 2, Padmasambhava gradually embraces the status of heruka. At first, he appears as a prince, then, through the practice of yoga of the deities, specific to Vajrayana, he transforms into one of the eight herukas of the Nyima tradition, probably Hayagriva, receives initiation from Vajravarahi in a dream, and in the end, we find him manifested as Dorje Drakpotsel, the power of Vajra wrath. A constant element regarding the hypostasis of Crazy Hermit is the presence in the narrative of the funeral grounds called in Tibetan düdul. In Vajrayana symbolism, this is not just a physical place, and that is very important as well, but the space of direct confrontation with impermanence, death, and the disintegration of conventional identity. It is the place where attachments are uprooted and ordinary identity is transcended. Life in düdul indicates full acceptance of the tantric path. The figure of Padmasambhava, as it is shown here in this chapter, presented and anticipates the typology of the nyönpa yogi of Tibet, because they have the same characteristics. provocative public behavior, adoption of heruka symbols, itinerant life, frequenting burial grounds, criticism, or even rejection, complete rejection of social conventions. This typology would reappear later in well-known figures of Tibetan Buddhism, such as the three great nyönpas of the 15th century. It is, Drukpa Kunle, Sangyé Gyeltsen, called as well Sanyon Heruka, and Kunga Zangpo or Unyon. So we can conclude that somehow Padmasambhava appears here as the model of the unconventional tantric yogi. As a conclusion about this hypostasis, we can say that this chapter can be read simultaneously in two registers and in two levels of understanding. Outer level, the text describes the life of an itinerant ascetic living in funeral grounds and adopting unconventional or even shocking behaviors. Inner level, a symbolic level, these episodes can be read as coded descriptions of the stages of tantric practice of yoga of deities. Thus, the text functions simultaneously as a narrative and as a symbolic instruction. The second hypostasis of Padmasambhava in Zanglingma is the disciple, lobma. Although tradition presents Padmasambhava as enlightened from birth, the text in Zanglingma referring Padmasambhava as disciple is about his training as a disciple, and this is not a contradiction, but a fundamental principle of the tantric tradition. In order to legitimize the transmission of tantric teachings, it is mandatory to go through the stage of discipleship, even for a realized being as Padmasambhava. Let's see the narrative context. It is worth noting that initial refusal of the master Prabhahasti, Indian master, who refuses to grant him the requested teachings. Padmasambhava is not immediately accepted as a disciple, which indicates that access to tantric teachings is not guaranteed to anyone, not even to an exceptional being. Later, he is tested by the servant maid Kumari, who proves to be much stronger than him and forces him to acknowledge her superiority in siddhis. The most important moment of the chapter is the initiation received by künkhyen. This initiation makes it possible to subsequently receive teachings from all other masters. Without this initiation, the subsequent journey would not be possible. But after this initiation received from künkhyen, Padmasambhava receives without any troubles teachings from 10 masters in India. From the 8 Vidyadharas of India, he receives Kagye, the 8 teachings of Mahayoga regarding the 8 Herukas, the 8 Sadhana, which constitute the basic teaching in the Nyima school. From Buddha Guya, we believe he receives the Anuyoga teaching, although the text seems unclear in this regard. And from Sri Singha, he receives the Dzogchen or Ati-yoga teachings. Thus, Padmasambhava receives the teachings of the 3 inner tantras of the Nyima school, Mahayoga, Anuyoga, and Ati-yoga or Dzogchen, and becomes, in this way, the holder of these teachings, which will later give him legitimacy in passing them on to his Tibetan disciples. Padmasambhava thus appears as the essential link between the lineages of transmission of the teachings in India and those later in Tibet. But why Padmasambhava's role as a disciple is so important? The image of Padmasambhava covers not only the role of the Supreme Master, but also the exemplary disciple. And the meaning of the text about Padmasambhava as disciple could be like that. that learning and discipleship are mandatory in the tantric tradition, even for a realized being, that spiritual authority is legitimized only through discipleship. Padmasambhava's authority is not self-proclaimed, but conferred upon him by receiving teachings from the 10 masters in India. Therefore, Padmasambhava does not appear as an enlightened autodidact, but as a disciple of the greatest Vajrayana masters of those times. In Tantric Buddhism, legitimacy comes from belonging to a lineage of transmission, which is achieved through initiation and through attaining realization in tantric practice. The embracing of the condition of disciple by Padmasambhava has an essential pedagogical function, and the hypostasis of the disciple offers a teaching model for practitioners. Even an extraordinary being such as Padmasambhava seeks out masters, receive initiations and teachings, makes an effort to learn and practice, submits to discipline. There is no realization outside the master-disciple relationship, and there is no valid transmission of Vajrayana teachings without initiation, Abhisheka or Wang, which is indispensable for receiving the teachings. Although presented as an enlightened being from birth, even Padmasambhava is obliged to accept refusal from the Prabhasti, testing by Kumari, and the mentorship. Padmasambhava's role as a disciple is essential to his later presentation as a master in Tibet. Through his role as a disciple, Padmasambhava becomes a model disciple worthy of emulation for the later disciples. At the same time, Padmasambhava is portrayed as the legitimate holder of all the Mahayoga, Anuyoga, and Ati Yoga teachings typical to the Nyima school, having received them from the 10 great Vajrayana masters of India. And the third hypostasis of Padmasambhava and Zanglingma is the hero, pawo. What is about here? Padmasambhava and Mandarava appear in Zanglingma as tantric hero and heroine, pawo and pamo. They twice face the hostility of the locals and are burned on a pyre, escaping unharmed each time, then help those who try to burn them with compassion and altruism to become followers of the Buddhist faith. The narrative context, firstly, Padmasambhava meets Princess Mandarava in the land of Zahor, and who becomes his spiritual consort, Chadyamo in Tibetan, in tantric practice. In Vajrayana, there is an ancient debate as to whether the tantric union called Mahamudra, Leki Chadya, must be achieved with a real spiritual consort called Mudra or Chadyamo, or with an imaginary one called Jnana Mudra Yeshiki Chadya. Zanglingma texts have a very Zanglingma text has a very clear answer to this debate. Karma Mudra with the real spiritual consort is a necessary condition for attaining supreme realization. Then Padmasambhava and Mandarava head to the Maratika cave, where they engage in the longevity practice of Buddha Amitayus. After 3 months, they had a vision in which Amitayus blessed him to be Dakka, pawo in Tibetan, Hayagriva, and his consort to be Vajravarahi, Dorje Pamo, and thus they attained realization as Vidyadhara of longevity. After that, they headed for Zahor, where Mandarava was from, with the altruistic intention of persuading the inhabitants of Zahor to convert to the Dharma. However, the inhabitants put them on a burning pyre with the intention of burning them. But after a few days, Padmasambhava and Mandarava were unharmed by the fire of the burning pyre, embracing in the Yab-Yum position on the lotus flower in the middle of the lake that had been created. So the king of Zahor and his ministers, amazed by this miracle, understood they were dealing with a realized master and asked for forgiveness. The same scene was repeated in Oriana, where Padmasambhava was from, almost step by step. So they were burned on the pyre and so on. The differences between the two scenes being insignificant. Both in Zahor and in Oriana, the consequences of the appearance of the two from the lotus flower were the same. The inhabitants, amazed by the miracle, agreed to convert to Buddhism and attain the high level of realization. But what is the meaning of the almost identical repetition of burning of the pyre and birth from the lotus in Zahor and Oriana? The altruistic desire to persuade the inhabitants to convert the Dharma led the two to go to Zahor and then to Oriana, even though they knew they were in danger of death there. The purification achieved through burning on the pyre concerned all those included in the altruistic intention. On the pyre in Zahor, the negativities of all those in Zahor were purified, and on the pyre in Oriana, the negativities of all those in Oriana were purified. For the two of them, burning on the pyre could mean the purification of the heaviest bounds of attachment, typical for the Padmakula, Padma family, Buddhic family. Those to their country of origin, to the place of their birth and childhood, to the people they came from, to their caste and social status, to their family and parents. Therefore, Mandarava had to be burned on the pyre in Zahor, and Padmasambhava had to be burned on the pyre in Oriana. In Zanglingma, Karma Mudra is considered to be the gateway to supreme realization. In the tantric union between Padmasambhava and Mandarava, we can see the mundane manifestation of the divine union between Hayagriva and his consort Vajravarahi, queen of the Dakinis. Karma Mudra uses sexual desire, considered the major obstacle for Mahayana and Hinayana followers, as fuel for tantric practice. Since the sexual instinct is naturally strong, it can be transformed into an opportunity for practice, into a method on the spiritual path. In Karma Mudra, each partner consciously accepts the limitations of the other's destiny and implicitly the possibility that this may create obstacles on the path to supreme realization. Each person's personal karma becomes shared karma of the both, and each person's destructive emotions and negativities must be purified by both. This explains why the burning on the pyre and the emergence from the lotus had to be repeated by Padmasambhava and Mandarava together, both in Zahor and Oriana. Now I will talk a little bit about the fourth, the hypostasis of Padmasambhava in Zanglingma, which is the Demon Tamer. One of the most well-known aspects of Padmasambhava is that of Demon Tamer, called in Tibetan düdul. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Padmasambhava is so strongly associated with taming the spirits of Tibet that it has been said that Padmasambhava is the demon tamer par excellence. Let's see firstly the narrative context. We can see Padmasambhava as düdul, demon tamer, in no less than 6 chapters of Zanglingma. First in Bodh Gaya, while the confrontation with the heretical teachers called the 4 great sorcerers at the Vajra throne. After that in Yanglesh cave in Nepal, while Padmasambhava was together with Shakya Devi, and they confronted obstacles created by the local spirits. Finally, Master Prabhahasti sent to them Kilaya teachings for defeating enemies and obstacles, So the obstacles were removed, the master attained the supreme Mahamudra, and the local spirits were completely subdued. After that, we can see Padmasambhava as düdul upon arrival in Tibet, when he was invited by the Tibetan king, and by way to the Tibetan court, on the way to the Tibetan court, he subdued all the spirits of Tibet. After that, we can see Padmasambhava as a düdul in chapter 10 of Zanglingma, when he performed 4 tantric rituals by which he subdued all the spirits, and in the final he subdued the most fearsome one, Machempomra. After that, we can see Padmasambhava in sangyé, when he subdued all the spirits and bound them by oath. And after that, all the spirits were put to work to build the monastery. And finally, we can see Padmasambhava as a düdul seeking a guardian for Samye monastery. Since the Naga king politely refused to allow the Nagas to be the guardians of Samye temple, Padmasambhava proposed that it be the warrior spirit Gyalpo Pekkar from the country of Hor. Batahor, more exactly. But more important than the narrative context is the meaning of the taming of demon. Taming is one of the central themes of practice in Tibetan Buddhism. At its core lies the polarity or opposition between tamed, in Tibetan dul, and wild or untamed, ge. However, there is no opposition, no static opposition between them, but rather becoming. Thus, between the two terms of polarity lies the dynamic process of taming in Tibetan dulwa, as well as a third person, that of the tamer. From the Zanglingma text, we can see that some spirits were subjugated violently, others were persuaded peacefully with offerings or treasures, relying on their greed, and other spirits, such as Machempomra, were subjugated using both methods, brute force and generosity. Thus, the taming of the spirits of Tibet was achieved not only through violent subjugation in the Tibetanese Drappo, but through the alternation of violence with skillful compromise, which can be seen as upaya, tab, the skillful means of method of Vajrayana. The dynamic process of taming, dulwa, means the existence of polarity between the tamed dul, and the wild or untamed ge, as well as the existence of the tamer. First, the tamer. The tamer is the master. Taming is done by the tantric master in 2 ways: by taming the disciples, and by taming the local deities, evil spirits, and hostile forces, which refers to transforming them into dharmapalas, guardians, or protectors of Buddhism, Chögyal or Sungma. The second is the untamed, and the untamed refers to the 8 classes of gods and demons in Tibetan Vajrayana pantheon. Lama Sin de Gye in Tibetan. In Zanglingma, they are Ging, Du, Tsen, Nejin, Simpo, Mamo, Sa, and Lu, but that is not very important finally. It's important to keep in mind that actually we can talk about 2 levels, 2 aspects of the untamed, the outer and the inner. Among the spirits listed in the Zanglingma text, personifications of elements or energies of nature can be easily recognized. Glaciers, mountain ranges, lakes and heights seen in connection with some regions of historical Tibet. But it's very important to underline, when we talk about spirits or obstacles in Zanglingma, we cannot only consider entities or forces outside the practitioner, but also obstructive forces from the practitioner's inner universe, that is, his own negativities, dripa. It follows that we can speak of an external and an internal aspect of the untamed, where taming constitutes an internal confrontation and self-discipline. And finally, the tamed, when we talk about the tamed one, we refer to Dharmapala, the protectors of Buddhism, which are the final result of the taming process. As conclusion regarding this hypostasis, taming or subjugating demons does not mean annihilation, extermination, or absolute destruction. Rather, it means domestication, transformation, integration into a spiritual order. Hostile forces are converted into protectors of the teaching. Instead of destroying demons, Padmasambhava binds them by oath, transforming them into protectors, chögyal. Thus, demons become agents of spiritual order. When we talk about taming on an inner level, demons can represent disturbing emotions, mental obstacles, forces of ignorance. Their subjugation becomes self-discipline, inner transformation, integration of disturbing energies on the path to realization. The taming of demons by Padmasambhava refers to the idea of transformation in Tantric Buddhism. Negative energies are transformed into resources that can be used on the path to realization. The fifth hypostasis of Padmasambhava and Zanglingma is the master, which is the most well-known. And firstly, let's talk about the narrative context in which this hypostasis appears in Zanglingma, because we have a lot of texts in Zanglingma about Padmasambhava as a master. And in the first part, indeed, I told you is chapter 1 to 5, Setinodhyana, India and Nepal. Indeed, this part presents Padmasambhava only maybe in 2 texts or something like that, and they are not very, very important. But the second part of the biography, chapters 6 to 23, presents him as a master very frequently and in very, very important texts. And the last part, non-narrative, chapters 24 to 41, is almost entirely devoted to his teachings, thus implicitly presenting him as a master. Thus, the image of the master becomes dominant in the second and third parts of the biography. The text of Zanglingma concerning Padmasambhava as a master can be grouped into 7 categories according to the actions performed by Padmasambhava as a master. They are like that. First, granting tantric initiation and transmitting teachings. It is about Wang Abhisheka. Second, conducting tantric rituals, compiling tantric practices, translation of tantric texts, giving teachings and advices on conduct, correcting disciples' violations of Samaya by receiving their confession, and explanation of the Vajrayana teachings. I want to say more only about the translation of tantric texts, because surprisingly, the texts of the Zanglingma show that Padmasambhava translates tantric texts or coordinates or actively participates in the translation of such texts. Given the importance of translators called Lotsawa in the spreading of Buddhism in Tibet, it might be very tempting to see Padmasambhava himself as a Lotsawa. like Rinchen Zampo, Vairotsano, or Marpa Lotsawa. However, we do not believe that we can deduce from the Zanglingma texts a separate role for Padmasambhava as a translator, but rather that the translation of tantric texts appear in the Zanglingma as one of the master's prerogatives. It should be noted that translating tantric texts required not only mastery of the two languages, but also deep theoretical and practical knowledge of the teachings being translated. And should be noted that Zanglingma showed that Padmasambhava conferred to his disciples the entire tantric initiation with all three levels provided by the Tibetan tradition. I mean Wang, Lung, Tri, Sum, empowerment, Wang or Abhisheka, and oral transmission of the tantric text, Lung, and oral instructions, Tri or Upadesha. In connection with this hypostasis, it's important to see Padmasambhava as holder of the transmission lineage, because in this biography, Padmasambhava is portrayed as the master holder of the transmission lineage, as he is the one who received the 8 teachings, Kagye, from the 8 masters in India, after which he passed them to the 8 disciples in Tibet. The transmission lineage of the teachings is one of the essential elements of Vajrayana, and thus Padmasambhava is clearly assigned as the connecting bridge, the essential link between the Indian and Tibetan parts of the transmission lineages of the 8 teachings, Kagya. In other words, presenting Padmasambhava as the holder of the transmission line is a plea for legitimacy. By demonstrating the continuity between the teachings transmitted by the 8 great masters of India and those received by Padmasambhava's 8 Tibetan disciples, full legitimacy is conferred on all lines, on lineages of transmission of the 8 teachings in Tibet. Now the 6th hypostasis of Padmasambhava in Zanglingma is the Omniscient, in Tibetan künkhyen. Künkhyen, meaning the omniscient one or the all-knowing one, is an epithet applied to enlightened beings in general and to Buddha Shakyamuni in particular, thus assigning omniscience as an attribute of Buddhahood. The narrative context regarding this hypostasis, the text in the Zanglingma referring to the Padma as omniscient can be grouped into several categories depending on the actions Padmasambhava undertakes. Knowledge of the past, knowledge of the future, knowing the thoughts of others, using magical powers and miraculous appearances, and hiding the terma teachings. The omniscient one, künkhyen, must be seen in connection with supernatural knowledge, nyönpa in Tibetan, which refers to the ability or quality, yönten, to know beyond natural limits. The hypostasis of Padmasambhava as the omniscient also includes other manifestations, let's say manifestations or phases, we can say them, under which Padmasambhava appears in Zanglingma, which cannot be separated as distinct hypostases. Padmasambhava manifestation as a magician, for example, Tunken in Tibetan, because magic is only one facet of omniscience or supernatural knowledge. So the master's manifestation as a magician is subsumed under the hypostasis of the omniscient as one of his forms. The manifestation of Padmasambhava as stator of the terma teachings, for example, terma teachings are very, very close related to knowledge of the future, so they appear to be only a particular form of this supernatural knowledge. And finally, the Padmasambhava's manifestation as Vidyadhara in Tibetan Rigzin, holder of knowledge, and as Mahasiddha Drupchen, must also be seen as forms of the Omniscient rather than distinct hypostases of Padmasambhava, given that they are strongly associated with facets of omniscience, such as supernatural knowledge and magic. And the seventh and the last hypostasis of Padmasambhava in Zanglingma is the Enlightened, in Tibetan sangyé. According to the texts of Zanglingma, Padmasambhava came into the world as an enlightened being, so he did not need to attain enlightenment through the actions described in his biography. However, even if Padmasambhava came into the world as a Buddha, for those around him and for the beneficiaries of his compassion, his Buddhahood had to be confirmed, proven, and actualized through his actions, which gradually led him from one stage to another to the full recognition of his status as an enlightened sangyé. Therefore, Padmasambhava's enlightenment was not attained through the actions attributed to him in Zanglingma texts, but only demonstrated, and this demonstration has to be made for his spiritual followers for didactic purposes. The texts of Zanglingma contain, in turn, all three landmarks necessary to retain the miraculous appearance of Padmasambhava, which means his status as an enlightened being. First sign is the lotus flower, which signifies immaculate, karmically uncontaminated existence. It is in opposition to ordinary birth from a mother's womb, which is seen as defiled, that is limited and karmically conditioned. The second, self-generation. As Padmasambhava said in the text, I have no father and no mother, I have no teacher or master, I have no caste and no name. I am a self-generated Buddha. And the third sign is qualification as a Nirmanakaya, in Tibetan Tulpeku, or shortly Tulku. In the context of Zanglingma, Nirmanakaya refers to the one of the elements of the doctrine of Trikaya, the doctrine of the Trikayas of Buddhahood, and represents the physical manifestation in time and space of the enlightened being. Nirmanakaya appears as a physical emanation of the two other aspects, Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya. Therefore, we cannot see Nirmanakaya as something independent, but only as one of the three kayas of Buddhahood connected to the other two. So, in the Zanglingma text, Buddha Amitabha, Avalokiteshvara, and Padmasambhava are seen together as Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. And this constant association between them fully demonstrates that Padmasambhava is considered by the biography the emanation of their emanation on the physical plane. So it is considered the Buddha. So overall, as a conclusion of this talk, the biography presents us with a portrait of the master from the perspective of the seven hypostases in which the image of Padmasambhava appears in it. It is a complex portrait seen from 7 different angles, the 7 hypostases being comparable to the 7 facets of a diamond, I like to say. Although each of them has a distinct personality and its own brilliance, only together, all 7, can they achieve the perfect beauty without any shadow or crack with which the diamond delights our eyes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Lucian. And now, if anybody has some questions, you're welcome to ask or to write them in the chat. And I have one. I'm curious if you found that the structure, the sort of structure of the biography is similar to anything from India, for example, like the hero, there's the journey of the hero and all these various stages. I don't know if maybe similar to the Buddha, Shakyamuni, or is it a sort of literary genre which is repeating?
Yes. The first part of biography is very similar to other Namtar. Only the first part. Because it contains a lot of symbolic scenes. Very important in the becoming of a tantric practitioner. And this kind of symbolic scenes can be found as well in a lot of other biographies. And not only one time, it is underlined the connection between Padmasambhava and Buddha Shakyamuni.
The second Buddha, as they say.
Yes, as a second Buddha, yes. Indeed. But the second part of biography has no similarities with other biographies, in my opinion. And you know very well that actually this part of biography has a very strong historical component, historical part. And it is very possible that actually the 3 parts of Zanglingma were added together later, because they are very, very different between them. And somehow it is very difficult to see, if you carefully check all the texts, which is the connection between them.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, Susan, please.
Firstly, thank you for a very wonderful and informed and easy to listen to. Will take a long time to digest. And I'm hoping that Shansheng might be able to post it for further review down the road. But my question goes to a reference you made kind of casually, because perhaps there isn't a lot in the text, as to the Nagas politely declining, was, I think, the way you phrased it. Padmasambhava's request to be a protector. And I'm wondering if you could perhaps, if there's anything within the text or something you might have that could elaborate on that relationship between himself and the Nagas.
Actually, there is a text in the biography. I cannot remember exactly which is the number of the chapter, in which we can see Padmasambhava telling to the king that all the spirits of Tibet were subdued, completely subdued. And that appears as the happy end of the fight with the demons. But after that, immediately, Padmasambhava comes and tell to the king, however, the Naga are not completely subdued, because their mind is going to evil things and so on. And he tried to subdue the Nagas, but in this regard, the biography doesn't offer too much details. We can understand that actually the Nagas weren't completely subdued.
Mm.
Somehow they escaped from Padmasambhava. And
Politely.
Padmasambhava made some predictions about the future of Tibet. And in these predictions, Naga will do a lot of evil things and will create a lot of issues, a lot of troubles in Tibet.
Interesting.
So they are not subdued completely.
Interesting. Which, of course, is if one is doing interior work as well as exterior work, do we ever subdue our own nagas? You know, it's like they're always bubbling up. So interesting. Well, thank you. Unfortunately, I have a 10 o'clock I have to go to, but I, again, thank you. And I hope there will be an opportunity
sir.
to see this. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, there will be very soon. So
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to leave. Yeah.
do we have any other questions from the audience? If not, meanwhile, I wanted to ask you, Lucian, if we have a group with Shangshung going to Nepal. You mentioned Marathika just before. We have a group in a few weeks going to, hopefully, given all the troubles in today's international airspaces, but I'm pretty sure we'll be going quite soon. And I'm wondering if you have any particular tales about either Marathika from your reading that you remember clearly that you'd like to share, or maybe also about Bhutan, where Padmasambhava was said to arrive on the Flying Tigress from Tibet. So I'm just wondering if you have any, or maybe in general, if you have any particular episodes from the biography that you really like and you'd like to share, something that struck you with all your reading all these years.
I have to admit, I like the scene in Nyangral cave in Parping in Nepal, because there Padmasambhava and Shakya Devi, before reaching the supreme realization in Mahamudra, confronted a lot of obstacles. And firstly, they thought they are only external obstacles, but finally they understood they are externally obstacles and internally obstacles as well. And for this reason, they sent some disciples in India and asked help from the Indian masters to confront and to win over the internal and external obstacles they confronted in Nyangral. And Prabhahasti sent to them Kilaya teachings. And maybe this is the most beautiful scene, except the burning on the pyre 2 times in Zahor and Oriana, which are my favorite scenes in all biography, and because they are full of symbols.
Very nice, thank you. I see that there's a question in the chat. I can read it out. Is there any mention in this biography about the prediction of future emanations of Padmasambhava, if he might have another emanation in the future, like a living Padmasambhava again?
I cannot remember something like that. Future emanations of Padmasambhava. But we have predictions about future reincarnations of Tibetan king. For example, Nyangral Nyima Özer is a reincarnation of Tibetan king.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Or anything that you would like to share, Lucian, for us?
I don't know what I can share. I can tell you for sure, all the time, to talk about my hero Padmasambhava is a big challenge. it is the second time I can notice that. First time was when I defended my PhD thesis. It was incredibly complicated, believe me. But indeed, maybe it is only because the complexity of the matter, and because you can tell a lot of things, but it's very, very complicated just to select the most important and to go into the essence. And this is what I will try to understand step by step about this biography. But I feel I have to be patient about that. And maybe in one day, I will be able to talk about Padmasambhava and to talk about the essence of the image of Padmasambhava only in 15 minutes and without any emotions, not like today.
Thank you, Lucian. Okay, if there are no more questions, then I think on behalf of everybody, thank you very much and best of luck with. I know that you're very busy practicing as a lawyer. I know that you've been teaching courses at Bucharest University, correct? I believe in Bucharest. And
yes.
Well, we wish you more free time, more discovery about Padmasambhava. As you say, it's a very incredibly rich topic and so much literature. So thank you for sharing your research and discovery today. Oh, I see that Greg has a question. I need to unmute her. There we go.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing all this. Unfortunately, something went wrong with the time. So may I kindly ask you, on behalf of a group of 7,000 people interested in this spirituality in Bucharest, is it possible to offer us later maybe a recording?
Yes, all our talks are recorded. We have a YouTube channel, so that won't be a problem. But also what I would recommend to you, if you're in Bucharest, maybe you should invite Lucian to talk directly there. That would be
We do. He's a very busy person, so we don't insist, but we are patient. Yeah. Thank you. Congratulations. I can't expect to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. In a few days, I think it will be up.
Great.
Shangshung UK YouTube channel. If you just search Shangshung UK, you'll see it. I think this was lecture 28 or 29 today of this series, but then there's also older ones before we gave this series this name. So there are many topics, so please follow us and you'll see more. Next month we have a talk. I'm still waiting for the exact title from the researcher, but we will have more talks. I think it will be about Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo next month, if I remember correctly. I'm still waiting for the exact title, but that's what
Thank you. May I send you an email again? Yeah?
Of course, yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lucian, and all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Nice weekend. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.